Today's daf is daf Yud, and we're going to start in Mirz Hashem on the bottom of Tes Amud Beis with Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah, which you'll see two lines before the bottom, the end of daf Tes Amud Beis. And let's just recall that Rabbi Zera had gone into a whole discussion about how many times in the parsha of Mitzorah does the Torah include the word small, which indicates that the Kohen who's placing the log shemen on various parts of the Mitzorah's body in the process of purifying the Mitzorah has to do so with his left hand. So he pours the shemen, that's called yitzika, into his left palm, and then from his left palm, with his right hand, he's going to place it on the right toe and on the head on the right finger bone of the Mitzorah. And the Torah divides up the parsha of Taras Mitzorah into two. There's the Ani and the Ashir. The Ashir is capable of buying a larger carbon, a more expensive carbon. The Ani is given the option of bringing a less expensive carbon. It's an Olav Yored. And the Torah repeats, according to Reb Zera, the word small not only twice in the parsha of Ashir, of Mitzorah Ashir, but also another two times in the parsha of Ani, of a Mitzorah Ani. And basically, according to Reb Zera, these four times are enough to derive the conclusion that, as a general rule, Kodshim has to be implemented through the right hand. So Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah or Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Yirmiyah was looking at other parts of the parsha of Mitzorah, and once again, we're going to see words that repeat itself. It says, Al boen yodo ayimanis, val boen raglo ayimanis, lamali. So again, the Torah is repeating itself that the Kohen applies the shemen for the Taras HaMitzorah on the thumb, on the right hand, and on the big toe, on the right foot. So according to your shita of exegesis, Rab Zera, why did the Torah have to repeat itself both in Ani and Ashir? Because your approach to the interpretation of the psukim was that if the Torah repeats it, then it's coming to teach us something, to extrapolate as a binyan av that in other cases we're also going to require the yamin. So what are you going to do with the repetition of boen yado hayumanis and boen raglo hayumanis? And here's where we start today's daf. Chad lahachshir tzdadim v'chad lifsol tzidei tzdadim. So it seems that when the Kohen will apply the shemen to the right toe or the right thumb, it's possible that he may put it on the side of the thumb or the side of the toe. And that will mean that it'll immediately, fall away. So therefore, we would have had a havamina that this would not fulfill the obligation vis-a-vis the process of Taras HaMitzorah. Kamash Malon, no. We have a ribui that as long as it's considered Yodo Ayumanis, then that's sufficient. However, if it's Stadim, if it's like not just on the side of his thumb or of his right toe, but it's like all the way down at the bottom, then the Torah wants to say it's possible. So again, we start with the pasuk al boen yodo yimonis, al boen ragla yimonis, that we said, and that appears in the parsha of an ani ashir, of wealthy Mitzorah. A Mitzorah ashir, and we find it again with regard to Mitzorah ani. So if that be the case, when it says chad, the word chad, even though it's referring to two different psukim, but chad refers to one person, either the ani or the ashir. And now what we're saying is that since it says al dam, then it means above the dam. And we're going to soon see if that's a problem of chatzitza, but we'll let that come a little bit later on. So now the shemen has to be put on the top of the thumb, the top of the big toe. And the Gemara later on is going to say that from the pasuk the olav mate menashe, that the word olav doesn't always have to mean on top, because it can't mean on top of the tribe of Menashe. What's mean on top of the tribe? But rather it means near the tribe of Menashe. And therefore, when it says here that the shemen should be placed al, with the word al, yodo hayemonis, al boen ragla yemonis, the al here means near. And it's teaching us that if it's near the top of his toe or his finger, his thumb, that's fine. But if it's on the bottom, that's already called sidei tzodim, and that's possible. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. There's another pasuk that has the word al in the context of a mitzorah. It says al dam ha'asham. Right, the mitzorah needed at the beginning of Vayikra in Perek Vav, Perek Yudalad, he needed also to have a carbon asham, and the dam of the asham was placed on his thumb and his big toe. And now the Torah is saying al dam asham, and we're going to interpret as al makom dam ha'asham. What does that mean? It can't be on top of the dam ha'asham, which was placed on his finger. So therefore, we're going to have to interpret it to mean that it is in the place of his finger or his toe. So Gemara says, "Lamai also." What's the point in putting it in the place of the blood? I mean, why not just say put it al dam, place the shemen on top of the dam? And the Gemara says, "Hani tzrich, I need it. Why? Because Rachmana al dam ha'asham." If only the Torah had said al dam ha'asham hava mina isei in. In other words, if the blood is there, then you can put the shemen on top of the oil, but niskaneach lo. Niskaneach kinuach means to rinse it off, to wipe it off. And if the oil will now go directly on his skin, but not on the dam, because he already rinsed off his hands and the dam is no longer there, the dam ha'asham, then it would be possible. And that's why I need the second pasuk that says Kosav Rachmana al Mokom. So again, there are two psukim. There's one pasuk al dam ha'asham, and there's another pasuk al Mokom dam ha'asham. And the al Mokom dam ha'asham tells me that even in a case where the dam ha'asham was completely cleaned off, nevertheless, we can go ahead and put the lug shemen directly onto the skin of the toe of the mitzorah. Because Rahman al Makom, now l'chora, once you have the pasuk al Makom, which means that even if the dam has been removed and been washed off, it's okay. Then why do I need the pasuk al dam? What's that coming to be mechadesh? Gemara says if we only had the pasuk al Makom, hava mina dafka niskaneach. Maybe I would have interpreted the pasuk as saying that it's got to be on the makom that used to have, formerly had the dam, and the dam was removed. Because whenever we see that phrase al makom, it means the place, but it's got to be without anything else. So the place now is the place which was once occupied by the dam asham, and now the dam asham was washed away. And therefore I would have had a havmina to say that, okay, that's a wonderful opportunity to put the log shemen in direct contact with the skin of the mitzorah because the dam was washed away. Aval isa, but if the dam is still there, and this is what I hinted at before, ema havi chatzitza, maybe it's not considered as if he's applying the lug of shemen to the bohen Yemonis or the etzba Yemonis of the Mitzorah because the lug shemen, the oil, will not come in contact with his finger, with his skin. It's being interposed by a dam osham, and the dam osham now becomes a chatzitza. We know that in the laws of mikvah, of tara, if you go into the mikvah and the water doesn't come directly into contact with your body because there's something that's chotzetz that separates it, like let's say you have a cloth around your finger or something, then that's not considered tefillah, you can't achieve tara. Here also, we're applying the same kind of a principle to the case of putting the log shemen onto the finger or alternatively or additionally onto the toe of the mitzorah. It's got to be kind of like a tahara of a mikvah, and there can't be any chatzitza. So therefore I need the pascal dam ha'asham, which tells me that the dam is there, it hasn't been washed away, and now the log shemen will be poured on top of the dam. And regardless of the laws of chatzitza, that's the way the Torah required the log shemen to be placed on the dam of the osham. Omar Rava, me'achad dichsiv al dam ha'osham ve'al mocham ha'osham. Once we have these two psukim, and we learned whatever we had to derive, and that means that the Torah requires that the Kohen with his right hand, he will place the dam ha'osham, and on top of the dam ha'osham, the log shemen on the finger and the toe. And not only that, ksiva yemonis b'dam. The Torah already in the parsha of dam ha'osham has already taught us that the dam ha'osham has to be placed by the Kohen on the finger of, right, the thumb and the big toe of the mitzorah, and it says yemonis, meaning that the Kohen has to use his right hand. Is therefore Rava asks the following question: Al boen yodo hayemonis, al boen ragla yemonis, tichsivi b'shem mitzorah asher v'ani lamali. If we already have, with regard to the asham, a requirement of yad yemonis, and the Kohen has to implement whatever he has to implement with his right hand in order to achieve the purification of the mitzorah, why did the Torah have to go on and on and on 4 times over to tell us that the Kohen has to use Yado HaYumanis? He has to use his right hand. And can't we derive that from Asham? Elama Rava says that let's go back to the original diuk in the Gemara of Rava from yesterday, and the Gemara there mentions that the Torah repeats Yemonis over and over and over again. Says Rava, Yad L'Kmitza. Twice we need the Torah to emphasize Yado HaYemonis, the right hand of the Kohen, for Kmitza. Now, in the process of a Karba Mincha, the Kohen does Kmitza, and that which is left from the Kmitza, which is called the Shiraim, that goes to the Kohen, and the Kohen's going to eat, that Mincha, that bread, whatever's there. But what we're going to see is that in addition to Kmitza, there are other situations in which we need either a hand or a leg in the Torah, and we want to know if the hand or the leg that's required has got to be the right hand or the right leg. And that's what it says, regel lechalitza, the double language of regel, which once again is redundant, is to teach us that chalitza requires the left foot. I'm sorry, the right foot, I meant to say. What does that mean, the right foot for chalitza? Right, a woman is married to a man and they don't have children. He dies without children and he has a brother. She, in order to get married, needs chalitza, in which case she takes off the shoe of the yavam, of the surviving brother. And now, where is the nal of chalitza? And where is her act of removing that now? Which foot is wearing the sandal that has to be removed? It's the left foot. And does she have to use her right hand for the act of chalitza? This we don't know. But in any event, there's an equation here between the log shemen of the mitzora for the purpose of tara and the nal and the regel of chalitza for the purpose of being matir the yavama. And now we have another gzera shava, says Rava, of ozen liritzia. Right? You may remember that the Kohen, in the process of purifying the mitzvah, has to put the log shemen not only on the finger and on the toe, but also on the right earlobe. And now we have a parsha called Ritzia, which we'll read in 2 weeks' time. That's in Parshas Mishpatim. And that parsha tells us that if the Eved refuses to go free after the 6-year period of his avdus has terminated, they give him a hole in his ear. And where do they bore the hole? In which earlobe? In the earlobe of his right ear. So this Gzera Shav of Ozen is going to teach us that not only does the Mitzorah require the receiving of the shemen on his right ear, but so too the Ritzia of the Eved has to receive a Ritzia boring a hole in his right ear. The Gemara asks the following question now. Smolis lamai osa. Right, the Torah tells us that the left palm is going to be used by the Kohen before he does the application of the shemen to receive the shemen. So the shemen is in his left hand. From his left hand, he uses his right hand to do the applications of the log shemen. But now the Gemara wants to know, if that be the case, that the palm is the left hand palm, why did the Torah have to repeat that over and over again? So, for example, we said before that the mitzorah in karbanos may be an ani, he may be a poor person, he'll bring a whole different set of karbanos than an ashir. And once again, in the karbanos of the ani, the Torah repeats this this word, if you will, of small, of left. And the Gemara now invokes a brisa of Rabbi Shmuel, Kol Parsha Shenemra V'Nishneis Lo Nishsel B'Shvil Dover Shenis Chadesh. So whenever the Torah repeats the same thing, there's a principle in Rabbi Shmuel that it's only repeated to tell you something new that we didn't know before. And in the case of the Mitzorah, we have the case of the Mitzorah Ashir, and now the Torah is going to repeat it in the case of a Mitzorah Ani. Now, the reason for that is because the Mitzorah Ani, instead of bringing an animal as a korban for Tara, he brings a bird. And now that he brings a bird, the Torah has to tell you that the law doesn't change as far as where the log shemen is in the case of a Mitzorah Ani. And the log shemen, as we said, is in the left palm of the Kohen. Amar Rabba Bar Chanam Rabbi Reish Lakish, Kol Bakum Shenemar Etzba Ukahuna Eina El Yamin. In any parsha where we have these two key words, Etzba and Yamin, that's teaching us that you must use your right hand. Nothing else will do. Kasal Kedaitach. Now, at this point, when the Gemara quotes Reish Lakish, the Gemara is under the impression that Etzba Ukahuna Be'inan, that when Reish Lakish said that Nemra Etzbo Kahuna means you require both words, both terms have to be there in order to establish that it's critical that the right hand be used. So it's interesting. In the Havamina, it's not enough that the Torah says etzba, which you would assume means the etzba of his right hand. The Torah also has to add the word kahuna, or b'nei Aaron HaKohanim, any word that indicates kahuna. And where do we know this from? Kedichsiv, because we have a pasuk in Vayikra Perik Dalid, v'lokach HaKohen, so we have the word Kohen, kahuna, midam chatas be'etzba'o, so we have the word etzba. And now we know. Now, you have to understand, and we've said this many times when we learned Zvachim, Maseches Zvachim, that the word velokach is not referring to the Kohen who brings the dam over to the Mizbeach for Zrika purposes. No, it's referring to the Kohen who receives the dam that's spurting out of the neck of the animal, of the Zevach after the Shechita. And now what we're saying is that when the Kohen receives the blood, the Kabbalah Saddam, and then he's going to apply it to the Mizbeach, he has to receive it in his right hand. V'gomar mi Mitzora. Now we have Gzeira Shava from Mitzora. So we have both Zrikas Dam Zvachim and we have Taras HaMitzora with the Log Shemen. And in both cases, we have to perform these rituals with a right hand, the Kohen's right hand. Tsiv v'tavala Kohenes etzba'o hayimanis. I mean, this is unquestionable. With regard to the case of the Mitzora, the Torah is outspoken about the fact that it has to be the right hand, meaning the right hand of the Kohen. And once we know it in Mitzora because it's explicit, then by virtue of the Gzeira Shava, we can now apply it to Zvachim in terms of the Kabbalah Saddam. Now keep in mind that in the pasuk with regard to Mitzora, you'll find two terms. It says, number one, V'taval HaKohen, and number two, it says, Es Etzba'o. So the word etzba is there, and it's explicit yeminis. So that's going to tell me that anytime it says both Kohen and etzba, those two magical words, then the requirement that's critical is the right hand. So basically, Reish Lakish has this Gzeira Shava, and now we're assuming in the Havamin of the Gemara that any time that Reish Lakish will require both kahuna and etzba in order to set up an absolute requirement of yad yaminis, based on the fact that in the case of the mitzora and the application of the log shemen to the bahonos, etc., of the mitzora, the Torah goes out of its way to use both the words hakohen and etzba. So now the Gemara asks the following question: Hare kmitz lo ksiv v'elo kahuna. What about in the case of a karva mincha, where the Kohen has to do kmitza? Guess what? We have the word kahuna, but we don't have the word etzba. Then, according to Reish Lakish, imagine the kmitza of the Kohen in a karva mincha could be implemented by his left hand. Utnan, and in our Mishnah it says kasa kamatz b'smol pasul. Are you telling me, therefore, that according to Rava, kmitza biyad small would be kosher? I mean, how could Rava go against the Mishnah? So Gemara answers, Rava, oh etzba o kuhuna. What Reish Lakish had in mind was not that you have to find in the pasuk both key words, etzba o kuhuna, but one of the two words will be enough. And if, therefore, in the case of kmitza, the Torah mentions kahuna without mentioning etzba, then automatically, once it says kahuna, we know it has to be the right hand of the Kohen. Amar Rava, right? That's what we just saw. Oh, etzba kahuna. Amar le Abai. Abai says to Rava, Hare holacha sevarim lekevesh. Dichsiv be kahuna. Are you going to tell me, Rava, that when the Kohen has to go up the ramp to bring the limbs of the Olah to the Mizbeach for purposes of Haktorah to be burnt on the Mizbeach, and the Torah says kahuna, so does that mean that when the Kohen is moving up the kevesh, he's got to hold the limbs in his right hand? Because again, according to your reinterpretation, Rava, whenever the Torah uses the word kahuna, it means the right hand. And Omar Mar, Zu holochas evarim lekevesh, utnan, and guess what it says in the Mishnah? Haregel shel yamin bismol, ubeis ora lachutz. Just 1 second. Where does it say left hand over here? 1 second. Tnan, haregel shel yamin. Oh, bismol. I'm sorry. There's the word. I missed that word, bismol. So now, let's imagine that on a daily basis, they had to bring a carbon olah. So after they did the shechita of the olah in the tzafa, the northern part of the Azara, then they gave 2 parts over to the Kohen to take it up the ramp to the top of the Mizbech, which was 10 amos high, and put it on the pyre, on the fire of the Mizbech. Now, what they did was when they carried the what word should we use? The innards. I don't know. Let me just see. Avarim. How do you, limbs? Oh, he translates as limbs. So there are 2 things that he's taking up from the carbon olah. One are the limbs, the avarim, and the other is the rush, the head. Okay. Now, the halach is very sensitive about not exposing to the mizbeach the part of the limbs of the animal that were cut, right? They did nituach, and they cut up the limbs of the olah for the purpose of burning it on the mizbeach. So, number one, the limbs have to be turned towards the inside so that the chatach, the place which was cut, should not be apparent. It's kind of like hiding it. The rush is just the rush, the head. So there's no point to turning it one way or the other. Anyway, so now the Kohen is going up the ramp, up the kevesh, to the top of the Mizbeach, and he's carrying with him the Avarim, which he translates here as limbs, and the rush. What else? Keep in mind that amongst the limbs that he's bringing up, because an ola's kula kol is completely burnt, is also a regel, is the leg of the animal. Let's say it's a lamb, the leg of the lamb. So what does he do? He should turn it over to the right side, as we said before, to sort of like hide, it shouldn't be facing, outwards, but it'd be facing sort of inwards, the place where they cut it, and base ora lachutz. So what is now able to be seen, exposed to the eye? That's only the ora. The ora means the skin, which is not cut, and that's fine. But the Mishnah says haregel shel yamin, right? Which is the more important regel? It's the yamin. So it's the right limb, I should say the right leg of the animal, but it's being carried up in the left hand of the Kohen. And you just told me that whenever it says kahuna, and in the case of halachas evarim, it does say v'hikriv HaKohen es hakol hamizbecha, so it has the word Kohen, and therefore it's got to be in his right hand. And yet the Mishnah tells us, and I believe this is a Mishnah in Masechta Tamid. Let's just check that out. Yeah, it's a Mishnah in Tamid. The Mishnah says that he's carrying it up in his left hand. How could that be? Ki amrin o etzba o kahuna. When do we say that either the word kahuna or the word etzba teaches me it's got to be in the hand of the right hand? That's b'davar ma'akiv kapara. That's only with regard to something that's absolutely critical, Like, for example, in the case of Taras HaMetzora, it's critical that he sprinkles the log shemen on the various parts of the body of the Metzora. And then we're going to say that either Etzba or Kahuna tells me the right hand. But in the case of holacha for the Kohen to carry up the ramp the limbs and the head of the animal for purpose of haktorah, that's not li kuva. That's not critical. What's critical is to get to the zrika. Anything past zrika is not critical. Neither the achilas Kohen, well, there's no achilas Kohen in case of an olah, but in other karbanos, nor the haktorah gabi mizbech. If all the this we had 2 days ago, if you remember, if the entire animal was completely lost or became tameh, it was burnt in a fire, I don't know what happened to it, then the kapara of the carbon is still in effect. So therefore, we're not talking about something that's ma'akiv kapara. And if it's not ma'akiv kapara, then we're not going to apply the principle. It's got to be with his right hand. So in other words, the right hand has more chashivus, but we require the right hand for something significant if that significance expresses itself in the fact that it's critical and essential to the kapara. So Gemara asks right away, right? Kabbalah. Kabbalah is one of the four basic avodos, and without it, the carbon is puzzle. So it's definitely ma'akiv kapara. Uksivbe, and it says in the parsha of Kabbalah, right, which is always going to be the karev or the hikriv, whatever word it is, kahuna. Tichsiv, v'krivu b'nei Aaron HaKohanim sadam zu kabbalah sadam. Right, as we said before, the krivu is always a lashon of kabbalah sadam utnan kibel b'small parcel Reb Shimon machshir. So Reb Shimon has an amazing shita that yad yamin in kahuna for the avodah of karbonos is not critical. But we're not studying Reb Shimon right now. Or maybe we will. But right now, we're under the impression we're studying the Chachamim of Reb Shimon, that the avodah of the Kohen has to be implemented with his right hand. And that's true for Kabbalah. And therefore, if the Kohen was makabel adam in his left hand, the whole carbon goes down the tubes. It's completely possible. And yet now you're telling me that with regard to a davar ma'akev es hakapara, it's enough that it says the word kahuna. And that's exactly what happens in Kabbalah Saddam. It says, v'krivu b'nei Aaron HaKohanim. Just 1 second. Here it is. V'krivu b'nei Aaron HaKohanim Saddam. And the Gemara says that what's v'krivu? Zu Kabbalah Saddam. I'm sorry, I misled you. I apologize. Rabbi Shimon Machshir, that's what the Gemara is asking. How could Rabbi Shimon be Machshir if the Kabbalah was done with the left hand of the Kohen when it says Kahuna? And whenever it says Kahuna in a Davar Ma'akivis Kapara, it requires the Yamin. Without the Yamin, if he does it in the left hand, in his head or his toe, it's possible. So the Gemara says, what, Rabbi Shimon? You're asking me about Rabbi Shimon. I wasn't talking about Reb Shimon. We were establishing that kahuna or etzba, one of the two, is sufficient to require yamin according to the Chachamim. But Reb Shimon Tarti boy, Reb Shimon is of the opinion that small is going to be acceptable, except in the case of Mitzorah where we have both etzba and kahuna. So Rabbi Shimon is of the opinion you need critically both magical words, kahuna and etzba. But in the case of Kabbalah Saddam, it only has the word kahuna, it doesn't have the word etzba, and therefore, according to Reb Shimon, it's a davar hamakivis kapara, but it doesn't have both kahuna and etzba. In fact, I would add the following, that according to Reb Shimon, maybe the case of Mitzorah is going to be a paradigmic case because there it has both kahuna and etzba, and therefore it requires yad yamin. And we had the 4 times that the Torah repeats the word yamin in Mitzorah, twice for the oni, twice. But as far as the avodas hakarbanos is concerned, then you know what? We're going to derive the conclusion from Mitzorah that you need both kahuna and etzba. And guess what? In the avodas hakarbon, like for example the Kabbalah Adam, it doesn't have both kahuna and etzba; it only has kahuna. Gemara says, is that really true? Umi boy Reb Shimon Tarti? Are you saying that Reb Shimon derived from Mitzorah that Yad is indispensable and critical only where it says both Kahuna and Etzba? Vatanya, what are we going to do with the following brisa? Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kol Mokom Shenemra Yad, Eino El Yamin. Etzba, Eino El Yamin. So you see that Reb Shimon holds that if it says Etzba, then you require the right hand. And Reb Shimon said nothing about requiring the word kahuna, and etzba was sufficient to generate a critical and essential requirement of yad yamin. And this is derived from a pasuk, v'taval hakonis etzbo hayimanis. And Reish Lakish holds that the Gzeir Shava tells us that whenever it says etzba, then etzba teaches you it's got to be the forefinger of the right hand, but it doesn't say kahuna. But let's keep in mind, it's possible, I'm just anticipating what's going to come around the bend, that Rabbi Shimon holds that etzba automatically tells me the right hand, forefinger of his right hand. But in a case where it only says kahuna, that's not enough. You need kahuna plus etzba. Oh, that's exactly what the Gemara is going to say. Etzba, the reason I know this, Rabbi, is because this Gemara repeats itself in Maseches Vachim. Etzba lo boy kahuna. When it says etzba, according to Rav Shimon, it automatically it indicates that you need a right hand. Kahuna, but if it just says kahuna, according to Rav Shimon, that's not enough. And therefore, in Kabbalah Saddam, as we had earlier, where it only says the word kahuna, it doesn't have the word etzba. So kahuna without etzba is not enough to establish the essential right hand. So the Gemara asks now, well, Kohen Lamali. Now, if you're telling me that the word kahuna, according to Rav Shimon, does not indicate right hand, because it didn't add the word etzba, and we need both, then why did the Torah bother with this superfluous word Kohen? I mean, Kohen doesn't teach me anything. Bishlema taught it the way we understood it originally, that either kahuna or etzba is sufficient to require the right hand, then we justify the word kahuna. But if you're telling me that even after it says the word kahuna, we don't require the right hand, so why did the Torah bother saying kahuna? And the answer is Biki, who know that the avoda of the carbon is only valid and qualifies if the Kohanim are wearing the big day kahuna. And that's based on a principle that we learned in Masechtes Vachim that bigdayim zuku nasam, that they are only called Kohanim when they're wearing the big day kahuna. Okay, Don, you have to get that straight. I mean, you might be a Kohen by birth, probably because your father was a Kohen and your grandfather was a Kohen. Yeah, that's fine. But you got to get the big day kahuna on. So maybe you want to go to the Machona Mikdash. I think they're producing big day kahuna over there. I'm trying to, I don't want to be cynical. Okay. Now, we